Have you ever walked through a hallway and felt, for just a fleeting second, that the walls were leaning in? As if the building itself was breathing around you. That sense of wrongness, the subtle distortion that unsettles your mind, was the obsession of Elias Thorne, a man once hailed as a visionary architect. But visions can curdle into nightmares, and his genius became something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of how beauty turned into horror, how walls became predators, and how an architect's dream became a labyrinth designed to consume not just bodies, but souls. Elias Thorne was born in 1964 in a quiet town that rarely produced anyone of note. From childhood, he drew endlessly. While other children sketched trees and animals, Elias filled notebooks with impossible structures, spirals of glass, corridors that folded into themselves, staircases that seemed to climb and descend at once. His teachers whispered about his unnatural precision. His parents worried, but when universities noticed his genius, concern turned into pride. By the time he was 30, Elias had designed award-winning concert halls, libraries, and sprawling commercial centers. Critics called his work revolutionary. Buildings with curves that seemed organic, spaces that felt alive. People claimed they could feel something in his creations, an atmosphere, an emotion, though they could never explain exactly what it was. At first, that mystery only fueled Elias's fame, but slowly, unease began to spread. Journalists digging into his early blueprints noticed strange details. In one library, the aisles of shelves, when viewed from above, formed a spiral that tightened around the central reading room like a noose. In a concert hall, the acoustics didn't just amplify sound, they seemed to swallow certain frequencies, muffling voices as though the walls themselves were listening. Visitors often left feeling disoriented. Some reported nausea, others an inexplicable dread. One woman fainted in the stairwell of the Thorne Museum of Modern Art after insisting the steps had shifted beneath her feet. Of course, none of these claims could be proven. Architecture critics brushed them off as superstition or the tricks of overactive imaginations. But Elias listened. He loved those stories. As his career advanced, Elias became restless. His clients wanted beauty, innovation, efficiency. But Elias was after something else. He once wrote in a private journal, "A building should not merely house life, it should possess it. Walls should whisper, halls should mislead. Spaces should evoke terror and awe. Architecture is not protection, it is dominion." Those close to him noticed his behavior changing. He spent sleepless nights hunched over blueprints, sketching furiously by candlelight, even when electricity lit his studio. He muttered to himself, tracing shapes over and over until the paper tore beneath his pencil. He stopped attending award ceremonies, ignoring acclaim in favor of chasing an idea that only he seemed to see. When colleagues asked what drove him, not everyone appreciated his direction. His proposals for new civic centers and theaters grew darker, filled with unsettling proportions. Committees rejected them, claiming they were disorienting, inhuman, even dangerous. Elias grew bitter. He accused the world of lacking vision, of fearing progress. Friends drifted away, frightened by his intensity. Even his family distanced themselves, unsettled by his increasingly erratic temper. Yet rejection only deepened his conviction. If no one would fund his vision, he would build it himself. Rumors spread of Elias purchasing land on the outskirts of the city, a barren industrial lot where factories once stood. Trucks delivered steel, stone, and glass in the dead of night. Workers complained of strange orders, hallways that connected to nothing, staircases leading into walls, windows placed where no light could ever shine. One foreman quit after Elias demanded that certain corridors be measured at precisely 3.7 feet wide, a dimension that made most adults feel cramped, yet wasn't quite small enough to call unsafe. It just didn't feel right, the foreman said later, shaking his head, like he was trying to build discomfort itself. Piece by piece, Elias constructed his masterpiece, a sprawling labyrinth of non-Euclidean design. Locals began calling it the Citadel. To the untrained eye, it was just another experimental building, perhaps a bit strange, but not monstrous. To Elias, it was alive. He whispered to the unfinished walls at night, running his hands over the stone as though it could hear him. And perhaps it could. By the time the Citadel's doors were ready to open, Elias Thorne had vanished from public life. He stopped granting interviews, stopped attending city meetings. His masterpiece stood silent, waiting. A few brave souls, artists, students, the curious, were the first to enter, drawn by its reputation as the strangest building in the country. They did not know that once inside, the walls would breathe, the hallways would change, and the labyrinth would begin to feed. For Elias Thorne, the dream was complete. For everyone else, the nightmare was just beginning. The Citadel opened without ceremony. There were no ribbon cuttings, no politicians smiling for cameras. It was simply there, its doors unlocked, as though daring the curious to step inside. At first, only artists, thrill seekers, and architecture enthusiasts ventured in. They expected a museum-like experience, a marvel of design to admire. Instead, what greeted them was confusion. The entrance hall alone seemed endless, its ceiling towering far too high for its exterior dimensions. Light fixtures glowed dimly, yet cast no shadows, as though the walls absorbed illumination rather than reflected it. Still, they stayed. Curiosity overruled unease, and the Citadel welcomed them in. Visitors quickly noticed that the Citadel defied conventional geometry. Corridors tilted ever so slightly, forcing a constant adjustment of balance. Windows looked out upon blank walls, or worse, upon other windows peering back into the same room. A group of architecture students once tried to map the structure. Their sketches, though made side by side, never matched. Staircases shifted in angle depending on where one stood. Doors shrank or widened when measured twice. One student dropped a pencil in frustration, swearing he heard it fall for far too long before it finally hit the ground. It wasn't just disorienting, it was impossible. And yet, they couldn't resist wandering deeper. The Citadel had a way of swallowing noise. Conversations dulled into whispers. Footsteps lost their echo. Even shouts felt dampened. Musicians who attempted to play inside were horrified. Notes collapsed midair, strangled by the walls themselves. Some claimed to hear faint murmurs within the silence, not echoes, but voices, breaths, heartbeats. One poet described it best in a frantic journal entry, later found abandoned on a bench. It feels less like the sound disappears, and more like something is feeding on it. The quiet is not empty. It is full of something that listens. Despite the unease, Elias managed to attract tenants. The Citadel contained dozens of living spaces, offices, and studios for rent. Its bizarre allure drew the eccentric and the desperate. Rent was cheap, and the chance to live inside the creation of Elias Thorne proved irresistible to some. Painters claimed inspiration struck harder within its walls. Writers swore their imaginations sharpened, but almost all confessed that their dreams became darker. Nightmares of endless corridors, faceless figures, and doors that led nowhere haunted their sleep. Still, they stayed. Something about the Citadel held them, as though leaving would be a betrayal. City officials demanded structural inspections, yet every inspector emerged pale and shaken, their reports riddled with contradictions. Measurements never aligned. Rooms listed as 20 feet long, measured as 18 on return visits. Safety codes could not be confirmed, yet no obvious hazards could be identified. One inspector left his report unfinished, scrawling only 4 words before abandoning his clipboard. This place is wrong. And yet, the city allowed it to stand. Bureaucracy buried the unease, and the Citadel became an accepted, if unsettling, landmark. What unsettled people most wasn't the building, but its creator's silence. Elias Thorne was never seen inside his masterpiece after its completion. His office within the Citadel remained empty, dust gathering on an untouched desk. Some believed he had died, his body sealed within the walls themselves. Others whispered that he had become one with the building, his mind fused with the labyrinth's shifting corridors. No theory felt comforting. The Citadel had no master, and yet it was alive. Tenants began to vanish. At first, excuses were made, relocations, sudden moves, unannounced departures, but their belongings often remained untouched, as though they had simply walked into a hallway and never returned. Neighbors whispered of doors that locked themselves, staircases that led to bricked walls where none had been before, and mirrors that reflected empty rooms even when someone stood directly in front of them. The Citadel wasn't merely strange anymore, it was hostile. And yet, for every person who fled, another entered. Curiosity outweighed fear. The building's reputation grew, an architectural wonder unlike anything else, a labyrinth of genius. But inside, its tenants were beginning to realize the truth. The Citadel wasn't just a structure, it was a trap. And Elias Bourne's dream of the perfect building was only beginning to reveal its purpose. At first, the changes inside the Citadel were subtle. A door that opened to the right one day would open to the left the next. A hallway that seemed to lead straight to the stairwell curved slightly longer each evening, stretching like a corridor of elastic. Tenants dismissed it as poor memory, tricks of perception. But then came the shadows. They didn't belong to the tenants, nor to the furniture, nor even to the dim lights that flickered overhead. They lingered in corners too dark to be natural, moving when no one did, pulsing as though they were breathing. Whispers accompanied them, low, distant, as though dozens of unseen mouths murmured behind the walls. One evening, a woman named Clara, who lived on the 4th floor, attempted to leave her apartment for groceries. She locked her door, descended the hallway, and turned toward the stairwell. But when she reached the spot where the stairwell should have been, she found only a blank wall. She retraced her steps, convinced she'd made a mistake. But the hallway looped, bending in ways it hadn't before. Every turn brought her back to her apartment door. Though she swore she had walked straight, panic set in. She screamed, pounding on the walls, but her voice was swallowed by silence. Hours later, another tenant found her collapsed by her own door, eyes wide with terror. She refused to speak about what she had seen, but she never attempted to leave the Citadel again. A musician named Adrian, fascinated by the building's acoustics, brought his violin to the central atrium. He played softly at first, his notes vanishing too quickly in the damp air. Then he played louder, forcing sound into the space. That's when he heard it. Not an echo, but a reply. A faint, distorted version of his melody, played slower, heavier, as though another violinist stood deep within the walls. He stopped playing. The sound continued. His bow dropped from his hand as the notes grew louder, circling him, coming from everywhere at once. Adrian fled the atrium, leaving his violin behind. Later, when he returned to retrieve it, the instrument was gone. Fear spread quietly among the residents. Some locked their doors and never emerged, surviving on dwindling supplies. Others tried to leave, but found exits sealed, staircases missing, or front doors opening only to endless corridors. Arguments broke out. Neighbors accused each other of sabotage, of moving furniture or changing locks. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. It wasn't people altering the building. It was the Citadel itself. Several tenants began reporting the same nightmare. In it, they wandered the corridors of the Citadel, chased by the sound of footsteps that never drew closer, yet never faded. When they turned to look, they saw nothing but the shifting angles of the walls. But the dream ended the same way each night, with the feeling of being watched, not by one figure, but by the building itself. As if the ceilings, the staircases, even the doorknobs had eyes. One tenant, a painter named Sylvia. One night, screams echoed through the third floor. Tenants rushed to find a young man named Daniel standing before an open elevator shaft. The doors had opened to reveal nothing but a hollow drop. Daniel's face was pale, his eyes fixed on something below. Before anyone could react, he stepped forward and fell. His scream was cut off by a sickening silence. The others rushed to the shaft, but there was no sound of impact. When they looked down, there was nothing but blackness. A depth that seemed endless. The elevator doors shut on their own, and when they opened again, the shaft was filled with machinery and cables, as though it had never been empty at all. Daniel was never seen again. After Daniel's disappearance, fear spread like infection. Tenants tried to flee, but the exits betrayed them. The main entrance led not to the street, but to another hallway that folded back into the building. Fire escapes descended into sealed rooms. Windows showed only more windows, reflecting infinite darkness. One woman smashed a window with a chair, only to find solid concrete behind the glass, as though the building's skin had grown thicker. They were trapped. And yet, the Citadel wanted them alive. It toyed with them, bending hallways just enough to confuse, opening doors just enough to lure. It fed on their fear, drank in their despair. Some whispered that Elias Thorne's spirit lingered, orchestrating their torment. Others believed the building itself had become conscious, birthed by his obsession. But no one could deny it anymore. The Citadel was not a home. It was a predator, and its appetite was only growing. Rumors of Elias Thorne's death had circulated for years. Some believed he had taken his own life during the Citadel's construction, his body hidden within its foundations. Others claimed he had fled the country, leaving his twisted masterpiece to stand as his only testament. But one night, a tenant swore they saw him. A tall, gaunt man with hollow cheeks and piercing eyes, wandering the corridors as though inspecting them. He carried no flashlight, yet the shadows parted around him. When approached, he did not speak. He simply turned, and the hallway behind him stretched into darkness, swallowing his figure until nothing remained. The witness was never able to prove what they saw, but the whispers spread. Elias Thorne had never left. In a locked utility closet on the lower floors, tenants discovered a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with Thorne's handwriting, jagged, feverish, often overlapping itself. The entries grew increasingly incoherent, but certain passages chilled them to the core. Walls must not only contain, they must consume. To live forever, I must dissolve into design. Blueprints are veins, corridors are arteries. When it breathes, so will I. The final entry was dated the week the Citadel opened. Tonight, I step inside. If it accepts me, I will never leave. Those who remained in the Citadel began to break. Food supplies dwindled, but the building seemed to provide scraps in uncanny ways. Cans of soup left in abandoned apartments, bottles of water appearing in closets that had been empty the day before. Some tenants accepted these offerings, whispering thanks to the walls. Others refused, terrified of what consuming them might mean. Sleep became dangerous. Nightmares grew so vivid that some awoke screaming, convinced they were still inside endless corridors. A few stopped sleeping altogether, their eyes bloodshot, their sanity unraveling. The Citadel didn't kill quickly. It corroded, it eroded, it devoured from within. A pattern began to emerge. Certain tenants vanished more swiftly than others. Those who resisted the building most fiercely, the ones who screamed, who fought, who clawed at doors, were the first to disappear. But others seemed to linger. They adjusted to the building's shifting geometry, moved silently through its halls, even seemed to anticipate its changes. It was as though the Citadel had chosen them, testing their resilience, shaping them into something else. Sylvia, the painter, confessed in a trembling voice, "It shows me things, blueprints in my dreams, designs for rooms that don't exist yet. And when I wake, they're here." The Citadel wasn't just consuming them, it was transforming them into extensions of its own design. By now, every resident heard the voices. They no longer came faintly, nor from hidden corners. They seeped directly from the walls themselves, overlapping whispers in languages unknown, rising and falling like breath. One man pressed his ear against the plaster, trying to decipher them. His eyes widened as he whispered, "It's not speaking to us. It's speaking through us." After that, he refused to speak aloud ever again, communicating only by scratching words into the floor with a broken pen. The disappearances grew bolder. Doors no longer merely trapped people, they consumed them. A tenant named Margaret was seen walking into her apartment, only for the door to slam shut. When neighbors forced it open, seconds later, the room was empty. Her belongings were there, her bed unmade, but she was gone. In another instance, the floor beneath a man rippled like water. He fell through, his scream muffled by the silence. When others rushed to help, the tiles were solid again. Spotless, as though nothing had ever happened, the Citadel no longer pretended to be a home. It revealed itself as a predator in full. Among the journal pages was one detail that no one wanted to believe. Elias Thorne had written extensively about his plan to merge with his creation. The final blueprint wasn't of walls or floors, but of a human body, its veins and nerves overlaid with corridors and stairwells. It suggested that Elias had never simply designed the Citadel. He had become it. His mind, his soul, his madness, all woven into the architecture. When the walls shifted, it was his thought. When the whispers rose, it was his voice. And when the building fed, it was his hunger. For the survivors, there was no denying it now. They were trapped inside Elias Thorne himself. A labyrinth of stone and madness. A man who had transcended flesh to become design. But what haunted them most was not the building's power. nor Thorn's legacy. It was the realization that the Citadel could never truly be destroyed. For how do you kill something that is both structure and soul? And what happens when its corridors stretch far beyond their walls, into the world outside? From the street, the Citadel looked deceptively normal. Its towering frame loomed over the neighborhood like any other piece of brutalist architecture. People walked past it daily, some even pausing to take photographs. But locals noticed something strange. The sidewalks directly beside it were always empty, as though pedestrians unconsciously crossed the street to avoid it. Birds never perched on its ledges. Stray animals refused to approach. Even the air around it felt heavy, as though it pressed against lungs. It wasn't just the tenants trapped inside who suffered. The building radiated its unease outward, like ripples across still water. Authorities grew suspicious when families began reporting missing relatives who had moved into the Citadel. At first, officers filed routine reports, assuming the tenants had relocated. But as the list grew longer, questions mounted. When police entered the building to investigate, they encountered contradictions. Officers reported being separated from their partners in hallways that should have been straight. Radios crackled with static. In one case, an officer swore he had walked in a circle for 20 minutes, only to find himself standing outside the very apartment he had begun at. No bodies were ever recovered. No evidence of foul play was found. Reports were filed, quietly buried, and the case was closed. The Citadel remained untouchable. Soon, the Citadel became the center of whispered stories. Teenagers dared each other to step inside at night. Ghost hunters filmed shaky videos of its corridors before fleeing in terror. Online forums filled with speculation. Some claimed the building contained an infinite labyrinth, folding reality inside itself. Others believed Elias Thorne had designed a portal, feeding the Citadel with souls for reasons unknown. A few insisted it was cursed land, that long before Thorne, something had slumbered there, waiting to be built upon. Every theory shared one certainty. Once you entered the Citadel, it marked you. Even those who escaped spoke of recurring nightmares, of hearing whispers in their homes, of seeing impossible hallways in familiar places. The labyrinth followed them. A handful of survivors did manage to leave, though no one could explain how. Some stumbled out in broad daylight, collapsing on the pavement as though spat out by the structure itself. Their testimonies were chilling. One man claimed he had been inside for only a day, though records showed he had been missing for 3 months. A woman insisted she had walked through a door that led to her childhood home, only to wake outside the Citadel, clutching a piece of wallpaper from her old bedroom. Another survivor whispered that Elias Thorne had spoken directly to them through the walls, promising release in exchange for obedience. None of them lived long lives afterward. Most suffered nervous breakdowns, paranoia, or sudden illness. All swore they still felt the Citadel watching them, even from miles away. Soon, strange phenomena began appearing elsewhere in the city. New buildings, constructed by unrelated architects, displayed unsettling similarities to Thorne's style. Staircases too narrow, corridors slightly tilted, angles that seemed to swallow light. People reported feeling dizzy inside these places, hearing faint whispers in empty offices, or losing track of time in windowless rooms. The Citadel's infection had spread beyond its walls, seeping into the very concept of architecture itself. Whispers claimed that Thorne's original blueprints had not been destroyed, but copied, shared, even studied by younger architects, eager to replicate his genius. Unknowingly, they carried pieces of the labyrinth into new structures. Explorers who dared venture deeper into the Citadel reported strange discoveries. Entire levels that hadn't existed before. One described a floor where every door led back to the same central hallway. Another claimed to find a spiral staircase descending into darkness, each step echoing louder until the sound became unbearable. One group of thrill seekers, armed with cameras, entered the building to document these floors. Their footage, later recovered, showed them laughing nervously, exploring, commenting on the strange acoustics. Then, the laughter stopped. The final frames revealed their flashlight beams, catching a figure at the end of a hall. Not Elias Thorne, not human at all. A silhouette shaped like a man, yet impossibly tall. Its arms reaching the floor, its head brushing the ceiling. The video cut to static. The group was never seen again. Eventually, the city attempted to close the Citadel. Officials boarded up entrances, erected fences, and declared it unsafe for habitation. But even sealed, the building remained restless. Neighbors swore they saw figures pacing behind boarded windows. Lights flickered in patterns, as if signaling to someone. Some nights, low vibrations rattled nearby houses, like the heartbeat of a colossal creature buried in concrete. The Citadel had become a scar, too dangerous to destroy, too terrifying to ignore. And yet, people still came. Curiosity outweighed fear. Paranormal investigators, urban explorers, cults, and those simply drawn by the legend all stepped inside, believing they would be the ones to uncover its truth. But none of them ever left unchanged. The Citadel whispered to them, seeped into their bones, marked them with its endless corridors. And as the years passed, one question grew louder than all the rest. If Elias Thorne could design one labyrinth to consume a city, what if there were others? By the time 2 decades had passed, the Citadel was no longer just a building. It was a legend, a myth stitched into the city's identity. People spoke of it in hushed tones, as if mentioning its name too loudly might draw its attention. Still, thrill seekers kept coming. Some saw it as a test of courage, others as a spiritual pilgrimage. They believed the labyrinth contained hidden truths, visions of eternity, glimpses of the afterlife, communion with Elias Thorne himself. But the truth was always the same. Those who entered rarely returned, and when they did, they came back fractured, as though pieces of them had been left behind in the corridors. Eventually, the city could no longer ignore the disappearances. Barriers weren't enough. So, the government ordered the Citadel demolished. Explosives were rigged along its foundations. Crowds gathered at a distance to witness its destruction. The charges detonated with thunderous force. Smoke rose into the sky, dust choked the streets, and the onlookers cheered. But when the haze cleared, the Citadel was still standing. Not a single crack marred its surface. Windows remained unbroken, doors unshaken. It loomed as though nothing had happened at all. Engineers were baffled. Officials were terrified. The project was abandoned. The Citadel would not be destroyed. After the failed demolition, something changed. The Citadel grew quieter. No more explorers emerged. No new reports of strange lights or figures. It was as if the building had gone dormant. But soon, the rest of the city began to change. People in nearby neighborhoods complained of nightmares, of walls shifting subtly in their own apartments, of staircases that felt one step too long. Children claimed to see doorways where none existed. Workers in office towers reported hearing whispers in air vents, always saying the same thing: "Come inside." The Citadel had stopped consuming from within. It had begun spreading outward. One of the last known survivors of the Citadel, an old man named Harris, broke his silence in a televised interview. His hands shook, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice carried the weight of truth. "It never wanted to stay contained," he said. "The building was just the beginning. Thorn wanted to live forever, and he found a way. Not as a man, but as a pattern, a design, a contagion." When asked what that meant, Harris leaned closer to the camera and whispered, "Look around you. Any building could be part of him now. Any hallway could turn. Any wall could breathe. If you think you've left the Citadel behind, you're already inside it." The interview ended abruptly. Harris was found dead in his apartment the next morning, every door and window sealed shut from the inside. Years later, stories multiplied. People swore that copies of Thorn's blueprints surfaced in black markets, traded among secretive collectors. Architects who studied them became obsessed, producing buildings that bent geometry in ways eerily familiar. Hospitals, their patients vanished between rooms. Office towers, where entire floors couldn't be found again. Schools, where hallways looped endlessly. It was no longer just the Citadel. The Labyrinth was growing, multiplying, hiding in plain sight. One stormy night, lightning struck the Citadel. Witnesses claimed the building lit up from within, every window glowing as if thousands of unseen tenants stood inside. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat, once, twice, then faded into darkness. In the silence that followed, those who stood nearby swore they heard a single word carried on the wind: continue. To this day, the Citadel still stands, untouched, unbroken. Its doors remain unlocked, waiting for the curious, the reckless, the desperate. But its corridors are no longer confined to that place. They stretch invisibly across the world, in subway tunnels, in hotel hallways, in the narrow stairwells of forgotten buildings. You may think you're safe, far from Elias Thorne's masterpiece. But the next time you walk down a hallway that feels too long, or open a door that shouldn't be there, remember, the labyrinth never ends.